I don't remember falling asleep, but I know I must have, because I woke up feeling startled. I'm not sure if there was a reason I woke up with my heart beating out of my chest. Maybe the reason is that I just realized I was sleeping. I put down my gun so I can drink some water out of one of the nearby bottles. I get the bottle to my lips when the sound of the doorbell fills the room. Now I remember. I heard the doorbell in my sleep. My mouth went dry, and I was thinking about taking a swig from the water bottle. But I think better of it. I recap the bottle and put it down, and pick up my gun. I look at the clock. 2 a.m. I know whoever it is at the door is not here to help me. I stand and look at the door. The doorbell rings again. I just blink at the door while holding my gun at my side, pointing to the floor with the safety off, ready if I need it. I thought back to when I woke up. I struggled through the haze of sleep deprivation to remember when I was last awake. I remember checking the food and water supply. I made sure the barricades over the doors and windows were holding up and undamaged. I know I finished my checks at around 11 p.m. I remember sitting down on the sofa. Then I remember waking up now. I was asleep for nearly 3 hours. That was the longest stretch of sleep I've had in weeks. The doorbell rang out again, and I lost my train of thought. Then I heard something that made me want to run away and hide, but also want to throw the door open in alarmingly equal measures. Will? It was my mother's voice coming from the other side of the door. William, honey, it's Mum. Her voice was rough and had an edge to it that I'd never had before, but I could tell it was her. I backed away from the door. My mum was one of the first people infected in our town of Hanover. She had been traveling across the country. On her way home, she had a layover in New York's JFK airport. This is where the authorities thought the bioweapon was released, but no one knew it was released until weeks after the outbreak started. My mum started to feel sick days after arriving home from her trip. We had no idea what she came down with was so serious. The local doctors were confused about what was wrong with her. Then the news of the outbreaks hit the national and local news. By the time the CDC came to Hanover, my mum was already dead. But like all people who died of this illness, she came back. Unlike her true self, she came back as a violent monster. William, let me in. I jumped. I was lost for a second in my musings of the past. Her voice started to sound more guttural and took on a terrifying edge. It took me a second to pull my thoughts together. I remember it wasn't long after my mother died, before the infected were everywhere, attacking and infecting other people. The healthy people left in town barricaded the doors and windows and tried to wait for help. I'm not sure how many people are still left. I can't remember the last time I heard the hammering of survivors repairing their barricades. William! My mother shouted and started kicking the door. I jumped and took another step away from the door. Any remaining humanity in her voice disappeared when she shouted. I looked around myself. I am running out of things to repair the barricades with. I have about a dozen bottles of water left, most half empty. I maybe have enough food to last about 3 days at the most. Only 2 bullets were left in my gun, and I had no extra ammo. I know I won't last much longer. But more than anything, I wanted to see my mum one last time. Mum, I called out. She stopped kicking at the door. Will? Open the door, Will. Humanity rushed back to her voice. She almost sounded like my mum, my healthy mum. Okay, Mum, give me a second. With the gun in my hand, I went to the door and removed the barricade. I opened the door, and there was my mum. Her hair's a mess, with leaves and twigs sticking out of it. She was wearing a hospital gown, but now it's covered in blood and viscera. She takes a shuffling step towards me. I opened my arms as if she's coming in for a hug. She isn't. I know that. But it's okay. She's right in front of me, and I wrap my arms around her. For a second, it was like having her back. The hug felt so good. Then, as I knew she would, she bit into my shoulder. The pain was the worst I have ever felt. I put the gun up to her head and fired. She staggered against me. I couldn't hold her up much longer, so I let her fall. I put the gun up to my head, and with the last bullet, I pulled the trigger. Just before my life ended, I heard gunfire and voices calling out for survivors. 2:30 a.m. Arnold was in the tank at the front of the convoy. Sporadic gunfire made it hard to hear when the radio cracked to life. I doubt we'll find many survivors here. It was the captain on the radio. This is the town of Hanover. Someone was at JFK when the bioweapon was released, and they brought the infection back here. So this is ground zero of the infection for this area. Keep your eyes open. We will see a lot of infected here. Arnold watched as a tank drove past boarded up house after boarded up house. He rode through hundreds of streets with nothing but infected and boarded up houses. Someone was on the bullhorn calling out survivors. Arnold thought it was pointless. He happened to notice that one of the houses had the door wide open. He could see lantern light coming from inside the house, and inside the house, 2 bodies lay on the floor. One of them had a handful of infected feeding on it. He nudged the guy with the gun beside him and nodded towards the house. The gunman took action, and bullets ripped through the house and killed all the infected inside.